With TSN Hockey Insider Darren Dreger, one half of the Rain Dregs Hockey Podcast. He's in Nashville at the draft. Dregs, how we doing?
Yeah, we're doing good. I mean, you guys have been here, right? Not just Nashville, but the draft. And you spend a lot of time lobby trolling, going from one venue to the other, meeting with player agents, meeting with scouts and GMs and the odd prospect. But it's a busy time of the year, and it's going to be an exciting week, I think.
What did lobby trollers do before the smartphone? Huh? Boy, what a just devastating exercise prior to the smartphone. Just
a lot of
payphones.
Payphone bank.
To sit in that lobby and wait on so-and-so to come out of a room. What's the juiciest thing you're hearing here in the lead up to tomorrow?
Well, I mean, the most current and equally juicy would be the back and forth between the Winnipeg Jets, Pat Brisson from CA Hockey, who represents Pierre-Luc Dubois, and the Los Angeles Kings. And I guess honorable mention might go to the Montreal Canadiens. Winnipeg and Brisson are hard at work right now. And, it would make sense to me that they're trying to get an extension hammered out so that they can transact a trade with Los Angeles Kings. But it's a complex situation, no doubt about that, just given the salary cap impact and all of the pieces that are in play and all of those things. So that's kind of the focus, and at least that's been my focus for much of the morning here in Nashville. I think we posted online. It should be up now on tsn.ca. Pierre LeBrun and I did a television segment, and, he talked about the number of suitors that are now drilling in on three-time Norris Trophy winner Erik Karlsson of the San Jose Sharks. And one that's intriguing, in at least a fashion of tire kicking, and this will surprise no one, is Brad Treliving in the Toronto Maple Leafs. And I say it that way because Tree is one of those GMs who's noted for being in every conversation. Now, it seems to me that this is fantasy hockey from a Toronto standpoint, just because, again, of the salary cap. Like, how much money would San Jose have to eat to execute that type of a deal? So just an inquiry, I think, more than anything, made by the Leafs. And you kind of just go layer after layer, rung after rung of all the percolating stories here.
Patrick Allvin said he's a little surprised there hasn't been more hockey trades leading up. Is it going to be a furious pace leading up to draft day, do you think, or draft hour, or do you think that it's going to be a little more plotting to get these hockey trades pulled off?
Yeah, I think it's more plotting, Blake, because of what I just said about Pierre-Luc Dubois and the potential of going to L.A. Everything is attached to the money, and the system is gummed right up, right? So, yeah, it's great for us to speculate, and I'm not suggesting that we're speculating just recklessly. Of course we're not. The Montreal Canadiens would have loved to have acquired Pierre-Luc Dubois, but Winnipeg's not in a rebuild, and the Montreal Canadiens weren't going to tear apart their roster to make a deal like that work. So the money is always a factor. I got to tell you, fellas, when Boston executed that deal with Chicago Blackhawks, that was interesting to me because among the many rumors that percolate out there, I had heard that maybe Vancouver was poking around the Chicago Blackhawks. And it's pretty obvious that Chicago is the new Arizona now, right? You need to park a salary like Taylor Hall. Yeah, no problem. Just send them our way. And I got the sense that Vancouver could have been among the teams. I'm not saying that they got real close, but maybe could have moved a forward or two or a player or two. And maybe the payback from Chicago's perspective is you move up in the draft. What do the Hawks have other than 19, I think? So what might that have looked like to move up into to the 11 spot? So anyway, it didn't happen, but I'm sure that there's been all kinds of that dialogue, and that'll likely continue late into tonight.
Could it still happen, Dregs, or do you think that's dead now between the Canucks and Hawks?
Well, and look,
was much there at all.
Yeah, I just heard that, so and I did try and check in with my Canucks sources and got no response. And normally when that happens, which isn't very often, then there's probably a little bit of fire to go along with the smoke. But maybe they knew at that point of my inquiry that, the Blackhawks were already well down the path with the Boston Bruins. But it's too hard to say. I use that as an example and not saying that it was close.
Well, let's flip it around, though. Do you think Chicago's done taking on salary? Because they're still below the floor, according to a lot of the sites I'm looking at here. And even if they're above it in some other creative accounting, they're not far above it. So, I mean, they still could take on salary, right? I mean, it's just a matter of how much they want to do in that regard.
That's exactly right. And that could be another reason why the Crickets are chirping out of Vancouver, right? Like if there's if there is the potential of the Hawks taking on something like that from the Canucks, I just think when I look at the draft ladder again, the thinking what I'm hearing is, and I'm not the draft prospect guru. You guys know that. That's up to Bob and that's up to Craig Button. But this is a deep draft class, especially in the first round. So maybe the sense is that the player that you're going to get at 19 really isn't that much different than the player that you're going to get in the top 11, right? And if that's the case, then maybe there is something to it. And maybe there is reason why there's no response and the waiting game continues. But yeah, no question. The Chicago Blackhawks are still in that vein of taking on some contracts.
And they still want to surround Conor Bedard with some talent. Obviously, Taylor Hall could play with him now. Is there anybody else on that roster that you envision them, like Tyler Johnson and Andreas Athanasiou, are just not the same quality as Bedard and even a vintage Taylor Hall. So I wonder if they do want another, suitable winger to play alongside those two.
Yeah, and I think that's exactly the case. And I think of Max Domi as being a pretty versatile forward. I mean, he's drawing attention. And I remember when, he initially left Chicago, there was speculation that he'd have no problem going back. But that may have changed too. But yes, to your point, Blake, I mean, they need experienced players, not players necessarily at the end of their career, or that could be an option, but that's a finicky market, right? We know that the season ticket sales went up as soon as they won the draft lottery, and Hawks fans, who are educated fans, realized they'd won the sweepstakes, getting Conor Bedard. So it's important to rebuild in a developmentally friendly way, but you still have to be competitive. And so I would think that the Hawks will have interest in further insulating Bedard and company.
Have you heard anything further on where the Canucks plan to spend some of this OEL cap savings? Do you think they're more inclined on the trade market, the free agent market, and if you picked up anything there with regards to this newfound ability from Vancouver to add players?
Well, yeah, I mean, again, they want to add defense. They need a third line center. They'd like to add a hulking winger. You do look at free agency, unless, via trade, you have that perfect scenario whereby you can move out a contract that you don't like that saves you even more cap relief. And then if that can't happen via trade, then obviously you do look at the unrestricted free agent market. That market isn't clamoring with high-end talent, right? It's not as deep as it has been in past years, but that's not a bad thing either, because, then the Vancouver Canucks aren't going to get into kind of the big game hunting sort of side of things. So I think that they're open to all scenarios, no doubt about that.
Who are the other Erik Karlsson suitors, as you understand it?
Well, it's difficult to pinpoint exactly, right? I mentioned Toronto being a tire kicker. Curiously, and I think LeBron mentioned this as well, the Carolina Hurricanes seem to be involved. There's a real big appetite in Carolina to get some business done here. They made it to the Eastern Conference Final. They were plagued by injury. Obviously that had heavy influence on Florida advancing. But Carolina has a taste, and the owner there, Tom Dundon, he's aggressive. I just have a tough time envisioning that blue line with Karlsson, Burns, and I guess we can throw Tony DeAngelo in the mix if they finally get
maybe
that.
Tony DeAngelo,
right?
Yeah.
And it's still gummed up a little bit, but it's not entirely dead. As Ferraro and I talked about on the podcast this morning, I don't know that Brent Burns and Erik Karlsson were a great fit together in San Jose. So I'm a little mystified by Carolina's interest, because let's not overlook Brett Pesce too, right? they're still trying to get a contract signed there, and that's another developing story that we've got to keep an eye on. Not just the extension possibility, but obviously the trade potential of Brett Pesce. And if they're legitimately willing to move on him, then there's no shortage of suitors for him.
Well, I was going to say that would be quite a departure in terms of profile to go from Pesce to Karlsson. Dregs. Yeah. There are a lot of Canucks fans salivating about Pesce on the trade market because they think him the perfect partner for Quinn Hughes as a right shot defensive defender. How available do you think he is right now? And do you have any sense of what the cost would be if you're acquiring Pesce in a trade right now?
Well, look, the preference right now is to try and get him extended. But my understanding is there's still a considerable gap between the Pesce camp and the Hurricanes. And I don't know how much dialogue there is there. It's a precarious spot because if they don't get something done and they just opt to keep him around, then he walks into unrestricted free agency, for nothing. The return for Brett Pesce would be a significant one. No question about that. But the line of teams that have interest in him is equally long. I mean, you guys can envision, as you just illustrated, what he might look like alongside Quinn Hughes. You don't think the Edmonton Oilers, even though they have no money, can picture Brett Pesce as an upgrade on Cody Ceci potentially? So, I mean, those are two Canadian teams, and I'm sure there are a couple of other Canadian teams with interest as well. But Carolina first has to get to that place where they're figuring out what direction they're going. If you're going all in on Erik Karlsson and you're negotiating, the finances and everything that goes into that with San Jose, and it makes sense to me that you'd probably move on Pesce sooner than later, but there's no guarantee of
that. Is Rome about to fall in southern Alberta? What are you hearing on the Flames and all the available players there?
Yeah, well, I mean, there's a lot of interest in those players. I think there's interest, I would say considerable interest in Tyler Toffoli. I wouldn't be surprised if he were the first guy to go. And then after that, it gets a little bit more complicated, I think. We know you've got Michael Backlund, you've got Noah Hannafin, you've got some other intriguing pieces. Lindholm, Pierre LeBrun talked about him in our coverage last night on tsn.ca. But it's not like, there's a mass exodus here potentially. Of course, Craig Conroy and the management group there could move out more than Tyler Toffoli, no doubt. I mean, there's opportunity for that. But they've got to get the right deal, too, because it's not a full-on fire sale there. They still have these players under contract. The only thing is these players have honestly acknowledged that it's highly unlikely they're going to extend their time in Calgary. But that doesn't mean that, they're looking to get out immediately. They're just being transparent and giving the Calgary Flames the opportunity to maximize the market.
Is this a post Daryl Sutter civil war inside the room? Is that what's happened here? Like, the boogeyman's gone for at least part of the room with Sutter out of there. Why are we still seeing signs of division here with a new world order and some popular guys taking over with Ginla and Conroy in the front office? You think this would be a way to bring people in and instead of people wanting to leave?
Right, but I think it's just the evolution of the game here and not on ice, off ice. Between restricted free agents and pending unrestricted free agents a year out from free agency, I don't think these players or their representatives have ever had more clout than what they have right now. And it was once taboo to, go to management or a club and say, well, I know I'm going into the final year of my contract, but I'm just telling you right now that I'm not going to extend. So if you want to trade me, trade me. I mean, that never used to happen, and now it seems to be happening more and more frequently. Why is that? I don't know. I guess that's in Tyler Toffoli's case. I think it's because he wants to manage the final contract of his NHL career. And if he and his family, it's nothing against Calgary, but if they see that they want to set roots down somewhere else, well, how do you do that? You do that by jump-starting the process. So I think this has more to do with the personal lives of these players more than it does the professional lives of these guys and the new takeover of Conroy and Ginla and company.
Lastly, from me, Dregs, you mentioned the Dubois deal, and I suspect that by the time most people hear this, we'll probably have resolution there with Pierre-Luc Dubois, the LA Kings, the Winnipeg Jets. But the rest of the Jets, Hellebuck, Scheifele, Wheeler, what's happening there, and do you suspect any of those names to be moved here in Nashville?
Yeah, like it still feels like Blake Wheeler ends in a buyout. That's how it feels, unless there's a way that Winnipeg can sweeten it to a point where another team takes him and they potentially buy him out. That's happened before, and it could happen again. Hellebuck, I think that there's a little bit of activity, but there's still sticker shock, and that might have been a misplay here, right? In the acknowledgement that this guy, even though he probably has earned an ask of upwards of Andrei Vasilevsky at $9.5 million, I think the contending teams who would have an interest in Hellebuck, well, look at the teams who have won the Stanley Cup with a goaltending that they've won it with. Do we really need to pay our goaltender $9+ million? So that limited the market a little bit. And guys, I'm surprised by this. I'm told it's super quiet around Mark Scheifele. Super quiet. And that's surprising to me, because this guy can be a real impactful player. He can be. And, based on where his contract's at, not a lot of time left on that. I feel like that would be a good fit for a lot of teams. But let's just pump the brakes here a little bit. Get through this week. Get through free agency. And as we say almost every single year, the teams that, either can't find the trade this week leading up to the draft, then strike out in free agency, they get pretty hungry and borderline desperate. And then maybe they start to really go after a player like Mark Scheifele.
Marvelous stuff, Darren. We'll let you get back to lobby watching or lobby waiting or lobby parlor games, whatever you're into. Thanks for this. We'll catch up next Wednesday.
Okay, guys, be well.
This Sekeres and Price clip brought to you by Northlands Golf Course. 6 to 90-day advance bookings relaunching on March 1st. Limited availability and conditions apply. Visit golfnorthlands.com for more details.